Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming. We're two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything, so to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And this is definitely the first time we've recorded the intro. Today, we are surging from the plains of Aya into the under realms, into the caves and the caverns beneath the world, where war itself was uncovered. Today, we are venturing forth to gather some Dweghom and to discuss my second army that I picked up in Conquest, the one that I have now personally been playing the most lately, and that is the Dweghom, the dwarves. Don't tell them that, of Aya. If you are interested in the lore of the dwarves, or the Dweghom, as we will call them, there's a big difference. We made a whole video about it. If you want to see that, lore, over there. But the Dweghom are an interesting army, and I think for the ones we've covered are maybe the ones that I feel like least needs this video, but I still want to do it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, mostly because we just like talking about this game. It's cool.
Yeah.
And two, because, like, if you're not a Dweghom player, you probably want to know what you're kind of looking at whenever you go play against Dweghom. And if you're completely green, this might help you.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're someone who's just trying to figure out what faction's right for you is really the thing that makes me feel compelled to do a video like this. You know, if you're just getting into the game, you're not sure which faction quite tickles your fancy or your playstyle preferences or your vibes, what have you. I feel like breakdowns like this that are more straight to the point, less mechanically dense, can help you get your head around what is or isn't going to work for you. And as we do all of these, we try to look at this as a faction identity rather than any sort of competitive list building breakdown or like what's good, what's efficient, because we aren't going to be the people to tell you those things. We aren't those guys. Instead, we look at it more holistically.
Yeah, and at least in our experience with Conquest, like even when we try to play a little bit more competitive, it's much more about how well you're playing your list as opposed to what you brought in your list. So like, especially if your goal is to get really good at Conquest and to perform really well, learning the basics and sort of like just applying fundamentals until you understand fully what you're doing is probably the best way to approach that, as opposed to something like crazy list building where you're like skewing super hard into like one specific strategy.
Yeah, and if you're trying to get your fundamentals down, I actually think that Dweghom is a really good force to do that with. And we'll talk about why, but generally speaking, they give you the chance to learn how to do that if you're new to the game, without some of the brutal cutting edge that if you make a mistake, you might be doomed in something like we've talked about in Nords or Woodrune. You just, you get a little more wiggle. So what does that? And for us, we think faction identity largely is made by faction rules first. So let's cover those. John, Dweghom, their first rule, firstborn children of war. How's it work?
So, this is really easy. Incredibly simple. All regiments in your army ignore the enemy regiments for purposes of determining reinforcement line. So basically, your reinforcement line goes up to a certain point on the board, and it stays at that point, certain point on the board, regardless of where your opponent's stands are. It's really good. For an army that really struggles with movement because they're slow and kind of blotting, this basically allows you to get cheap amounts of movement further up from reinforcement line, but you have to get there first, which I think really sort of fits the narrative of slow but tough and powerful Dweghom.
Yeah, because once the Dweghom take an area, it's very hard to push them back out of it, and they're gonna be then essentially deep striking, in a sense, into the back lines, further up the board. I warn you, this may make you think you should be trying to deep deploy most of your units. I actually recommend against it. It can be a trap just because of how clogged the board gets. And in my experience, a lot of times it's just better to bring them in off the backboard and like double run them up the board anyway. But from time to time, this could really give you some more options that you wouldn't have in another faction. So, not what you hang your hat on, but good. Next, one that, man, you really don't hang your hat on. this is the third rule like this we have talked about in the third video we've made about faction focuses. And it's kind of a bit of a theme that we keep coming across these factions that have like duel-oriented rules that matter very, very little in our experience here on the channel.
Yeah.
And that's like, a tough thing to unpack.
Yeah, like briefly, because we've talked about it in every episode. We're going to leave little tidbits of it through every little one of these things as we cover duels, is that largely the problem with duels is not that these like rules exist that benefit from duels. The problem is that your opponent just gets to say no to them pretty regularly with very little regard. Because even if they don't get to hold an objective with it, if that, depending on the way that like the command stack lays, if that unit still gets to go, there's a high likelihood they can just destroy the unit you have. So in a lot of ways, it's either the duel's useless because either you're destroying the unit anyways, or you're not going to live for the duel to matter. Duels, I think, work best in like a grinding situation where two units are spending multiple turns in with each other. And that just doesn't happen a ton in our experience with Conquest, in a way in which a duel would like dramatically change enough to like want to spend points on upgrades or like take a character specifically for the dueling ability or anything like that. It's mostly a thing that sometimes comes up to sometimes make my opponent not hold an objective. But rarely is it like a super cool two dudes fighting on a rooftop in the rain moment.
Yeah, it's not as sick as you think. So there are a number of factions that have rules like this, and currently they are very, very underwhelming. However, if the core rules for duels change, the assessment on how useful these are could change as well. They have already stated publicly that they aren't happy with how duels are working. They are going to be continually changing how that's happening. How that's going to happen, who knows? I will not even deign to guess. I have ideas, but no idea what the actual outcome will be. But just know that if duels change, the opinion of this could change. But as is today, in early July of 2024, Pursuit of Dweghom I have yet to have happen once in a game. So Pursuit of Dweghom, what it lets you do is have your command stand in a regular unit call out an enemy character for a duel. So instead of having to have a character to say, duel me, your sergeant, essentially, can do that same thing. There are some changes, though. If your sergeant challenges someone to a duel and they decline, they don't get any of the normal duel negatives. They truly could say no without any sort of repercussions. Secondarily, if the enemy unit has declined already, they can't decline again. Meaning, if you get in with unit number 1 into the enemy, and you say, duel me, and they say, no, and then you get into their flank or something with another unit, and you say, duel me, they then have to say yes. But I warn you, that's hardly ever going to happen, if at all. So just, keep an eye out if you could maybe make this work for you in like a cheeky little surprise, but it won't be your core of your strategy.
Yeah, and like there's a little reward if you happen to destroy a unit, right? Like destroy a character in a duel, where you get some stuff. But at that point, if you've gotten that, you sort of like you've already won. So it's weird if you'll keep going. But moving on from the duel, we'll go on to arguably the biggest thing for Dweghom's core rules, which is the creeds.
Yeah. So TLDR lore bit, the Dweghom Society is divided into 3 different sub-factions. You have the sort of tempered sub-faction. These are sorcerers and people of that nature. You have the ardent sub-faction, which are sort of like war priests in a sense. And then you have the clans, which are normal, everyday Dweghom, who are more of your basic leaders and foot troops. And they all exist in various forms of power in various hold cities. And every unit we have so far can fall into each of these 3 categories. And the creed says that, as a rule, simplified, depending on who you take as your warlord, you get a bonus rule set for your army that aligns with the creed of who you take to be your warlord. For example, if you choose a tempered character, such as a tempered sorcerer, to be your warlord, you get the Tempered Creed. That is elemental potency. Each time a friendly character stand performs a spellcasting action, gain an elemental power marker and add it to the elemental power pool. This is a big one.
Power pool.
So, every time someone casts a spell, boom, you get a power token. You could spend a power token to automatically count as a success on a single defense, clash, or morale test die of any friendly regiments or character stance within 8 inches of the Tempered Sorcerer or Steel Shaper's character stand. The character stand or regiment may use up to 5 elemental markers during the course of a single action. That's a lot of words, but honestly, it is not super complicated. What this means is every time you cast a spell, you get a little marker. I literally grab poker chips and put them down in front of me. Whatever you like, a dice, a token, whatever works. Just keep track of it. And then as long as one of your units is within 8 inches of any tempered character, Steel Shaper, Sorcerer, what have you, and they are going to roll a dice. If it's passable, you can spend a token, auto pass. So even if John is cleaving me with cleave 3, I need to roll ones. I need to spike super hard to survive. My unit's going to get wiped. I could say I'd rather not. I'm going to spend 5 markers. I auto pass all 5 save rolls. That's that. Let's move on.
Well, but where that wouldn't work is if, say, I have defense 2, evasion 0, and you have cleave 2. There is no way to make that save roll. I cannot use markers for it.
That's the key, is if you can't pass it on any dice roll, you still fail it. It won't go through. Now, let's say I have defense 2, John hits me with cleave 3, that's blowing right through. I can use them on the resolve check after that, though.
Yes.
I'm going to eat all of his attacks, but I'm going to auto pass the resolves, maybe. So, it's an ability that seems more complicated than it is, and it's very, very good. Very, very strong. Second is if you have an Ardent character, you instead get the Ardent Creed. The first time in a regiment in this army would become broken during the battle, the regiment performs an out-of-sequence free additional rally or combat rally action at the end of the action that caused it to become broken. This effect only triggers once per battle for each regiment. What that means is when you're fighting and you take a bunch of damage and one of your units breaks, they get shot, they get spelled, they get fist fought, and they break, you don't need to rally. It automatically happens, and that will go off once per unit. So if you're fighting for an objective and your opponent is hoping to break you, so you're no longer qualifying for that objective, not anymore. You immediately are back in contention to try to contest.
And where this is really good is that it's very rare for a unit to break more than once in a game. Like most units break once, and if they don't break again because they either die or they win. Yep. So this effectively, in a lot of ways, just allows you to go, I don't get broken, which is good, but it doesn't always. So you can't just take 12 stands of initiates and be like, I'm never broken.
Deal. Yeah, it's not quite nearly that good. And you might be thinking, hey Joe, you said 2 out of the 3 subfactions of that lore thing. Where's the third one? And unfortunately, there's not a third one. There's currently no clan's creed. If you take a Hold Ray, who is the clan leader, you don't get a creed. You leave those on the table. It's unfortunate. I'm not sure why that's the case. As of today, there is no clan creed. However, I would be absolutely gobsmacked if one isn't added later. So go look if you're watching this far, far later in the future. There may have been a clan creed added in the intervening time, but at least for now, there's only a creed for 2 of the 3 sub-factions.
Mm-hmm.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and like that's essentially the core rules for Dweghom. They're not super, super, super intensive. They're very simple by nature, sort of. I think that's to their benefit, but I think it does sort of shoehorn the next category, which is supremacy abilities, into discussing really only 2. There's an argument for a third, but really you're going to determine what creed you want, and then from there you'll determine what warlord you're going to use. So like your 2 supremacy abilities at that point are the Ardent Karawa with Righteous Annihilation first, which is, for the duration of the battle, all friendly command stands get +2 to their attacks characteristic.
Hey!
That's really good.
That's good. That's good.
It combos with the dual core mechanic if it ever becomes useful. But even if it doesn't combo with the dual, it's just good to get +2 attacks on a command stand. There's more attacks. It's good. But wait, there's more. In addition, once per battle, the Ardent Karawa can activate the Supremacy ability. All friendly regiments add +2 to their charge distance when they charge an enemy regiment that is within range of an objective zone.
Yep.
That's really good.
It's really good.
You're a slower army, so being able to get up onto something like Nords, who's probably beating you to objectives, and getting +2 on the charge to get there is very, very good. Taking a move 5 unit to move 7 plus D6 for the charge, but it's pretty good.
So now it's minimum move 8, even assuming you roll a 1. I mean, that's hugely important. And also, remember, you get to that in addition to your creed, or even if you do get onto that objective and get, kind of punched in the mouth a little bit, you will unbreak immediately. And you'll still have your +2 to your command stand attacks. The Ardent Karawa is the only option for the Ardent Creed currently. Again, they could add more later. But that's why John said this is where we get kind of pigeonholed, because if you want the Ardent Creed, you have to take the Ardent Karawa. There's no other option.
Yeah.
However, his supremacy ability is really cool, in my opinion. However, if you want to take the Tempered, and you want to do the elemental stuff, then you have to go with a Tempered Sorcerer or a Steel Shaper. The one that is very popular, it is the most popular warlord in this faction by a colossal margin currently, is the Tempered Sorcerer, and its ability, Elemental Puissance? I'm gonna go with Puissance. I went to Kentucky Public School, don't judge me.
I went to Florida Public School, and I read that as Elemental Piss Ants, so like, let's
Sorry,
go.
I can't go back. It's Elemental Piss Ants now. This character stand may perform 2 spellcasting actions each round, and this character stand cannot attempt to cast the same spell more than once despite this. This supremacy ability is always considered to be active. So you probably think, why is that better than all them other words? 2 words, fireballs. Because generally speaking, Tempered Sorcerer, what people do is they use this to be able to double cast uber hand grenade spells from the Tempered Sorcerer onto the enemy lines that then cause not only a bunch of damage, and they have armor penetration, but they also, with an upgrade, could cause people to re-roll successful morale saves against the hand grenades, and in doing so causes a ton of damage. And then you're already winning because you're chucking hand grenades. Secondarily, though, now you're getting double those I win tokens. You get double auto pass tokens.
And generally, you're going to put this character in a range unit, like Fireforged or like Hold Ballistae, and then you're just going to
Hellbringer
activate them.
Drake.
Or Hellbringer Drake, and then, well, in Hellbringer Drake's instance, you can't do what I'm going to say you can do. But if you were in an infantry regiment, you could then draw the next card, which you might just have be the unit that he's part of, and then he gets to shoot his own ranged attack, which is a fireball, with their shooting attacks as well. And you can just delete a unit. It's like within, I think, 14 inches. You can just be like,
Oh,
dead.
yeah.
Just gone.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
And you get the cool tokens. So you do a bunch of damage and you get the big tokens. It's really compelling. It's good stuff. It is why it is by far the most popular character in this subfaction. Because if you want Tempered, you gotta take a sorcerer, and this sorcerer is doing some work. It's a little unfortunate that it's so narrow, but it is a thing. I have seen some people try to take a Holdray who would be the clan leader, but generally if you're taking him as a warlord, you're taking it to put him on top of an ironclad drake, which is a big armor-plated drake-like wrecking ball that you can mount a king on top of if he's the warlord. People do it for fun. It's a good time, but then again, you give up all your creeds, at least for now, which makes it a little bit underwhelming. Mm-hmm. But there is gas in both of these.
And there's another one called the Steel Shaper that is a much more like defensive version, more utility version of the Sorcerer, which we're not going to cover here because it's sort of just the same thing, but just more defensive.
Right? He heals instead of chucks grenades.
Yeah, it's similar ideas. It's just those two lists run pretty close to each other.
Yeah, currently a lot of people are like totally on the Elemental Creed train, and I get it. I totally do. But I think there's gas in the Ardent Karawa tank. I think his abilities are good. They just, when you have something that is that incredibly good as auto pass saves and double chuck spells, it sucks all the air out of the room for other abilities, but don't sleep on the Ardent Karawa. There's fun to be had there. Mm-hmm. Now we get into the more generalist discussion of how Dweghom plays. And this one I feel like is a little easier to write than the others we've done, because they are very tricky armies. This, however, is the opposite. I feel like Nords and Wadroon, in terms of like the tricky, high-skill play army spectrum, are way over here. Dweghom are almost anchoring the other side of that spectrum altogether.
Yeah, I think between them and 100 Kingdoms, I think those two factions are like we're going to play an honest rank and flake fantasy game factions. Because like really what Dweghom does is they just move up honest into mid-range, slogging up the table. They have tough, high defense. They're going to sit on objectives and they're going to fight you there. And they're going to fight you off of objectives. And they're going to last longer than you are. And they're going to be still there later in the turn. And so you have to find a way to crack them or you are going to lose the game. Yep. Just sort of exactly what you expect them to play like on the 10. Like that's just what they do. Pretty much everything in the army has pretty good melee profiles and at least okay defense, especially compared to other factions. And I think the only true negative they have is a lack of movement tricks to sort of simulate them being slow. They don't. I think we're a lot of games that just like, oh, they're the dwarves or the slow faction. We'll make their movement lower. That's not the case here. They have the same movement as most of the other like factions in the game base, but they don't get all of the cool tricks of movement, like the Vanguard ability, the triple moves, the triple activations. Like they are just 2 activations. Move up table, charge, clash, fight, shoot.
That's that.
Double cast spells.
Hand grenades. Job's done. Job's done. But I think they do need a drawback, and the movement speed thing makes sense to me. I would rather them do it this way than to actually chuck down their movement speed. And it does mean that, generally speaking, the downside of Dweghom is if you deploy poorly, you don't have a way to bail yourself out. Which is going to happen from time to time, especially if you're newer in the game. However, what Dweghom does give you in terms of a little bit of having leeway is in fist fights. They holler brawl pretty well compared to other factions. And when they get stuck in a holler brawl, where we've talked about, like, where with Nords and especially, with Wadroon and especially with Nords, you have to pick your fights very, very carefully or you will get stomped, because you have to know how to trade up, because a lot of your units don't fight very well one-on-one. You've got to be kind of cagey. You got to be doubling up on stuff. With Dweghom, you don't have to do any of that. The armor saves and the pretty good fight profiles across the board means that even if you don't make, like, a uber precise fight prioritization decision, you might be able to just brawl your way through it in a lot of cases, which gives you some leeway to learn how to play.
Yeah, they're definitely like a fundamentals faction. Like, do you want to only worry about the game plan in front of you and not a bunch of twists and knobs and stuff to make the control panel work. You just press a button and it does a thing. That's Dweghom.
Mm-hmm. And they're quite good at that. Generally speaking, their game plan is going to be the same every time. They want to get up in the mid-board, they want to get on those objectives, and start throwing haymakers back and forth, and last one standing wins. Which is not a flavor that's for everyone, but it's a flavor that I really enjoy, and I think is designed pretty well here, most of the units.
But speaking of flavor, we're going to go to our rating section of the show.
Ooh, John, give the disclaimer.
And so the disclaimer here is that we are not rating them off of their competitive viability.
Mm-mm.
We are not rating them off of some sort of like omnipotent knowledge.
Disgusting.
We are rating them. We are rating them off of our just like humble opinion as people who have played this game, continue playing this game, and will continue to play this game for the foreseeable future, and probably change our opinions about these things in the future as things change.
Amen.
And so, if you have a differing opinion, or you want to try to illuminate us for something that we get wrong or don't quite understand, feel free to drop it below, but know that we aren't telling you that you have to agree with us.
Not at all. We're just rating these things on what we think is kind of important for people who are of our like-minded nature, who aren't here for like the competitive crunch, but you're here for like flavor vibes, good time, and to play a game and an army for a long term. You're not looking to jump all the time, and you appraise these things a little differently. And so for us, the first one we always start with, one of the ones for me that I think is most important, flavor to gameplay rating. John, what do you think?
Solid. B. Slightly above average. It is not quite there, but all of the makings to get it there are there. To sum it up, I mean, they are sick dwarves with a cool backstory of harnessing the power of war to kill their dragon masters and wield powerful magic. Tough armor and cool war machines. They have all of that, right? Like, they've got these big drakes. They have, like, put armor on that are like monster trucks. Does that. They put cannons on the side of another drake and put armor on it, and it shoots stuff really well. That's awesome. They've got, like, wizards who throw double fireballs and blow stuff up. Cool. He's got hand grenades for days.
Don't forget magic mechs. We got those.
Got magic mechs. You have honestly, like my favorite model in all of Dweghom is the Dragon Slayers. They look sick and they fight pretty good. They just struggle getting there. But all of that sounds great. The reason why it isn't an A+ or S, really, and I think it could get there, is it could take some of these like core rules they have and just bump them up a little bit, right? Like A1, there needs to be a clan creed.
What are we doing?
Like, it is hard to like have anything without a clan creed. Even if it was something simple as if your warlord were to die, then like everything else gets like, I don't know, flurry against the unit that killed him or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's cool, right? That'd be something, at least. And the other thing is that this elemental conduit thing, like these elemental markers, like conceptually are awesome, right? Where I'm casting spells and I'm generating these tokens, right? But then when I'm just using those tokens to auto-pass saves or like auto-pass attack rolls or resolve rolls, like, yeah, that's mechanically good, but like narratively, it's not, right? Like, you can make the argument that it is, but it could instead be a thing where it, like, gave units abilities, much like Chance, where, like, maybe each unit has an ability that if you blow a marker on them, they get that ability till the end of the turn, right? Like, things like that. There's more interesting mechanics that could be made here than just, we get blanket ignore saves on a faction that's already very tough.
Yeah, the elemental, like, one... clan creed, what are we doing? You gotta have one for each. Otherwise you're just cutting off a third of your options. I think that would just kind of speak for itself. But in the lore for sort of like the elemental mastery and the sorcerers and stuff, the Dweghom are forced to learn how to control these powers that they are born with against their will, because if they don't exert them somewhere, there's a chance they will explode. It will just erupt out of them in a likely horrifically damaging way. So in the fluff, they talk about how they have to try to channel this in various ways depending on your skill level. And for those who are of low skill, they just have to pump all of their power, like Fireforged, into these colossal cannons. So then they're not shooting actual cannonballs, they're shooting coalesced elemental magic that they're then charging up off their own bodies and then boom, cannon firing into the enemy. And that's all sick. That's awesome. Mech pilots and the Steelforged are guys who have to vent power. So they get inside of these mech suits, and then they use their power to control these mech suits, which vents some of their power and lets them be able to stay stable. That's amazing. Again, machines powered by this elemental energy to do unique things. And that immediately makes me conjure to mind the idea of like, yeah, we're generating cool stuff, we're getting elemental power tokens, then we're going to spend it. If I do it on the big cannon Drake, maybe it gets cooler cannons, or it gets a keyword on it. If we do it with Fireforged, maybe they get more range. If we do it with Steelforged, maybe they get more tanky. Like, something that buffs a unit into more of a niche direction, that you're kind of trying to like pull these elemental levers, like you're the Steel Sorcerer or the Steel Shaper trying to influence your soldiers' arms and armor during the battle. It's a really cool thing when I picture it in my head, but the execution of just auto pass is a flavor fail, even if it's a competitive huge win. And I just think we could do better. There's room to do better.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't. I don't think it would sting so bad if the rest of it wasn't full of bangers.
Right?
Like, there's so much cool stuff in Dweghom that you're like, but like you could have. You're already at 11. Like, you're already at 11 out of 10. You could have been at 12.
Let's point to Magma Forge quickly. Like, what?
Like, you already have the most power metal, like, album cover of every Conquest faction. You could just play through the Fire and Flames. No one could stop you.
You could just choose to do it right now on expert mode. 100% the song all the way through. Upload it to early YouTube. Do pretty well. It'd be delightful. But no. We won't. Not yet, at least. I'm hopeful that maybe we get something in the future, it becomes more flavorful, and also it would open up the design space that if the power isn't just I auto pass saves, it is something that is equally sort of cool and useful, but in a more niche constrained way per unit to help the unit do more of a niche thing rather than just like do an incredible thing like auto pass dice saves. That now you've turned the power down some, and it gives you a little more design room, rather than just kind of being painted into a corner by the strength of the ability.
Yeah, and at the risk of like diving into a corner with this is like we know they can do it, right? Like Parabellum's doing a great job with like Sorcerer Kings and like some of the new City State stuff, and like all the new stuff they've been coming out with is showing like in a more interesting design space they're wanting to play around with. And like truly though, like they only have so much time and they can only work on so much at once. So like it's going to take time for some of this stuff to get revisited. So I wouldn't expect it to be like this forever. This is a constantly changing and evolving game, and if there's anything I've learned from like the last getting close to a year of Conquest is that Parabellum does change stuff. They just take some time because they don't want to just do things off the rip. They sort of want to test stuff and see what works and what doesn't.
So TLDR, I hope that we have to remake this video and come back and update this to like an A+ or an S+ as they windmill slam some sick mechanics in here and a awesome clan creed. But we live in the world we live in now, so a B is what they get.
I would love it if Parabellum just drop kicked me with some sick rules.
Holy shit, it'd be incredible. Stavros could throw me to a table with some incredible off-the-dome duel rework, and now the Dweghom, like, sergeants are getting to duel enemy dudes, or maybe duel enemy command stands forcibly, even if they don't have a character.
Yeah, every time you duel, you actually have to play a separate game of First Blood and then go back to your...
Yes!
No, that would take so much time.
No, I have no notes, John. I don't want to hear your reasonable responses. I'm only here for vibe. Sorry.
But...
yeah, B is solid, though. A B is a solid rating. The cool faction stuff gets enough.
You'll still get a degree with a B.
I did get a degree with B. Some C's.
But moving on to something that I think they perform very well at is newcomer friendly.
Boom.
Not quite an S rank. I will be honest, they're not quite S rank because there's some traps in the faction and some of the jankiness and sort of like mishandled like core rules prevents it from getting S. But it does get pretty close in an A. Maybe even an A plus, but like definitely an A. I think especially if someone's new to wargaming, right? If someone's like new to wargaming in general, Dweghom is a very easy pitch because everyone sort of understands what it is on the tin. They're dudes in heavy armor that like move forward and punch stuff. And generally their tactics are pretty easy to explain. And it allows a new person to sort of understand the true nuance of like baseline Conquest that is in the movements and like positioning and how to pivot and how combat reforms work with the 1/16 of an inch. That was a dig at Joe for y'all. But in all actuality, like they play honest with very little tricks. They have tough armor, allows them to be forgiving to new folks. They have high damage potential with many of their units, but it isn't reliant on you getting a combo off, which is very nice.
Yeah, there's no Rube Goldberg machine to get to your like viability.
The closest is having to build your sorcerer the right way in your list building phase and get them in range.
But even that's not overwhelmingly difficult, because again, chuck 2 hand grenades a turn isn't all that complicated once you understand how the tokens work.
And how to get the hand grenades. Like, so, the other thing that makes them really easy for newcomers is that there's not a ton of units in the faction that are what I would say, like, bad or traps. The ones that are good are pretty clearly good on the 10. The ones that are not so good aren't terrible. There's just other things in the army does better. Because I think the internal balance of the faction is a little off. But it does create an army list that is mostly like a low skill floor. But as we're going to sort of cover next.
Long term.
Is the long-term mastery is where this army suffers. As opposed to the other 2 factions that we've covered so far, Nords and Madroon, like they're going to get the lowest rating here in a C. It's not terrible, like it's not the worst, but it's definitely not very high of a ceiling because once your armies don't combo, like at all. They do what they do.
There's still certainly some skill expression and ceiling in terms of where you place your sorcerers and keeping your radiuses up and where you target priority with your hand grenades and your actual shooting attacks. And your deployment, like I said, if you have no movement tricks to like redeploy or anything like that. If you do make a deployment mistake, you're going to get borked. But all of those things aren't nearly as complicated as what we described for some of the other factions. So eventually you're going to reach kind of a bit of a ceiling with like how deep you're going to go down the rabbit hole. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing depending on what you're looking for, but if you're looking to do like uber giga galaxy brain plays, probably not going to get that here.
Yeah, if you're looking to have a faction that you can just sort of like play forever, right? And never play another faction and always have infinite possibilities and new stuff you can always uncover about this faction. I just don't think Dweghom's it for that. I think Dweghom does what they say on the tin. I think Dweghom has lots of cool models to collect. I definitely think it was on my short list of factions I wanted to play starting off. But like I think it does suffer from just sort of like there isn't a bunch of complicated stuff to dig into, which, to be honest, isn't a bad thing. Not every army can be that.
I don't think every army should be.
Yeah,
you just got to know going in what you're getting.
Yeah, just sort of being honest there. But I do think that does mean that's how it gets like one of the best newcomer factions in this game status.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything that you put a lot of time and investment and design into somewhere is going to take away from somewhere else. And I think here, that's where that sort of shifts. You know, and the others where we said that they're really, really not newcomer friendly, but they got a huge skill ceiling, it's the opposite here. That's all right. Just make your decisions appropriately. Dweghom is a force that I have deeply enjoyed learning, and one that I'm excited to continue to learn, especially as like stuff like Magma Forge comes out. And for me, I find I'm more broadly interested in a lot of the force, as opposed to like my Nord army, where I'm only interested in like a half to like 2/3 of the army. So for me personally, Dweghom has just been a delight to try to like get in and get to grips with and start making a bunch of list possibilities, even though they are constrained by some of the Creed stuff. And I highly recommend them, especially if you're someone who's new to wargaming and you're debating on if you want to make this your first faction. I don't think it's a bad choice if you are someone who likes this sort of honest, let's brawl gameplay style. It'll serve you well, you'll learn your basics, and hopefully end up turning out pretty well on the other side of things. And if, after all of this, we have missed something horrifically, or you just vehemently disagree with our assessments, put them down in the comments below. I would very much love to hear it. Or if you maybe have Dweghom questions that we didn't at all address, which is entirely possible, put them down below. I'd love to hear it. Also, lastly, and most importantly, if you also have overwrought design ideas for how to fix these War Dolly elemental token mechanics, I want to see them in the comments below. A full 38-page dissertation would be really great. You could cite your sources, and I will read them all. It would be a delight. None of us are going to get what we want, but I would enjoy it a lot. John wants you to subscribe and like stuff, or whatever.
Yeah, or if you want to windmill kick me into a pit full of like your Dweghom thoughts, that's also, acceptable. But yeah, we could say the stuff we're supposed to on YouTube, like subscribe and like or whatever, but like truly, I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more, we're making it. Like, it's just going to take us time.
I don't want to spoil anything, but we've done 3 factions. We're looking at a 4th.
Yeah. Really, if you enjoyed it, we're just going to keep it up. Stick around. Don't tell Stavros about our dumb ideas, I guess. I don't know.
I love watching you struggle. For now, that has been all of our opinions, bona fide and Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all at the next one.